So good morning. This morning we're going to be looking at the humility of God. And a week ago, some of us went to a study with another local group, and that was a study about humility. There's many good verses shared and some great discussion. And before I even went, I knew what the topic was, and I thought that would be a good study topic for us to follow up our study on sovereignty. So we're going to do that today. And of course, we've been studying many biblical terms with the goal of understanding them in light of the truth of God's character. And so 2 weeks ago, we studied the sovereignty of God. So now a study of his humility fits right in. Because don't we think it must be hard to be humble when you're at the top? And God is certainly at the top. Okay.
Humanly speaking, yes.
Yes. So, of course, being sovereign, the boss or the highest authority in most situations is not conducive to humility. It would seem natural to think that God could become proud. There is a saying attributed to John Edward Acton, a British baron and Catholic historian, in a letter written to Bishop Mandel in 1887, in which Acton wrote, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." You've probably heard that before, or some variation. Mm-hmm. Do we see any corruption in the world today among powerful people?
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
If God is sovereign, so there's no one over him that he must answer to, and he also has all power in the physical sense, wouldn't we, in our experience, expect there to be a risk of corruption on God's part? You'd almost think that could happen.
I think so, except God can't be corrupt.
Okay, because why would that
happen? His
happen?
Character to be
God
corrupt.
is love.
Because he's love, yeah.
Okay, so God has the attribute, he has many attributes, but the primary feature of his character is other-centered love, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also there's no higher position God could attain to or struggle to reach, right? He's already at the top.
So there's no point in being corrupt, because most people who want more power. That's why
They're corrupt because they're after more power or
more money or
or
something. But he owns everything, and yeah.
And he has all power.
He has all power, so he doesn't need to be corrupt.
So when we did the study a week ago, we started with this verse.
He hath showed thee, O man, what is good. What doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God?
Okay, so there's many good verses were shared in that study, showing us the need for humility, and we were reminded of the need for that quality in our lives. So to walk, it says to walk humbly. To walk has as a figurative meaning one's manner of life or conduct. Does walking with God suggest living in a godlike manner? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a scripture that says we ought to walk as Jesus walked or something.
Okay, yeah, I should have.
That is.
I should put that in here.
One of the Johns or Peter. It's near.
I'll add that later.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Genesis 5:22, Evans.
And Enoch walked with God, and he begat Methuselah 300 years, and begat sons and daughters.
Thank you. And then Genesis 6:9, Judy.
This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God.
Okay, so there's two people, and there may be others, of whom it is said they walked with God. So there's a suggestion there of walking with God in humbleness, in the sense of walking or behaving or living as God does. Both God and Enoch or Noah were acting in a similar manner. So how do we walk with God in humility? How do we achieve humility? Actually, we're told, let's see what Colossians 3:12 says. Michael.
Put on, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercy, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, and long-suffering.
Okay. Achieving a goal often involves measuring progress to assess the best way to get there. And many would do that by comparison. And here's a verse about comparison that's interesting, Paul.
Yeah, like this. For we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves. But they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise.
Okay, so that's not a good way to do it. So Micah 6:8 says, walking humbly with thy God. The walking is not how you physically walk, but it is the way you conduct your life governed by your mind, your character. Isn't humbleness a quality of the heart, which is really the mind?
Mhm.
But then we have a problem because look at what Jeremiah 17:9 says. Dorothy?
The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And then Jeremiah 13:23. Evans, can you read Jeremiah 13:23?
May ye also do good that are accustomed to do evil.
Okay, God says to walk humbly, but that apparently is not in our hearts to do, at least not enough. And we can't change it on our own. So what is the solution? It's suggested here in Ezekiel 36:26.
I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh.
Okay, so how does he do that? How does he give you a heart of flesh and make or keep you humble?
Well, the next verse tells you somewhat. I will put my spirit within you. That's how.
Okay. But is putting his spirit within us just kind of reprogramming us, say? Flipping the switch from proud to humble?
I think in a way.
You know, we've got to want this. We've got to, what would be the words? We want to become like he is, right?
Right.
We want to follow his way.
Yeah. So we've got to want it implies that he won't do it to us. He won't reprogram us or anything unless we are willing.
Correct.
Okay.
Because he won't force us.
Right. That's the point we want to get. If he starts fiddling very much with the software in your brain, pretty soon you are no longer you. Okay. You have to make the decisions. And actually, how he does it is well laid out in this verse, 2 Corinthians 3:18, Michael.
But we all with open face, beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord, are changed into the same image from glory to glory, even as by the Spirit of the Lord.
Okay, so we need to look at examples of God's humility. You might not have even thought about God's humility before, but so when we start looking, it's surprising how many there are. There's quite a few of them. And let's start with 1 Corinthians 3:4, Paul, 13:4.
Okay. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up.
Okay, and now let's read it from the New International Version. Dorothy.
Love is patient, love is kindness. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if it's not proud, then it's humble, right?
It's humble, yes.
So there are verses saying he is humble, although we want to see humble in action, not just words. Okay, we're told not just to talk the talk, but also to walk the walk. And the question is, does God do the same? So it helps me to know that God himself is humble. So let's look at that. Was Jesus humble? Zechariah 9:9, Evans.
Oh, rejoice, O daughters of Zion, shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, the King cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ash, and upon a colt the foal of an ash.
Okay, thank you. And I put here the this word lowly. I've got the definition. There's a few different humble or lowly. Okay, let's look then at Matthew 11:29. Judy.
Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls.
Okay, so in that case, the lowly is tapinos, maybe. And I put the definition for the word here, lowly in spirit or humble is one of the definitions there. Okay, let's go to Philippians 2:5-8, Michael.
Okay. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. Verse 8 as well.
Yes.
And being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross.
Would you call that even an extreme example of relinquishing sovereignty and stepping down?
Absolutely.
Actually, from the highest to the lowest, right?
Yep.
And to serve rather than be served.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is interesting as we make the transition from talking about Jesus to talking about his Father. John 14:9. Paul.
Yeshua said to him, have I been with you so long, and yet you have not known me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, show us the Father?
Okay. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So he is suggesting that his Father is just like him. Would that include in humility?
Yes.
Okay.
It does not act disgracefully. It does not seek its own. It is not provoked, does not keep an account of wrong suffered. He's talking about love again.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So if a person is proud, they will not admit they're wrong. They will think they are the best. Okay, if they're proud, and will insist on having things their way because, like, I know best, they might say. But love doesn't do that. Okay, so Dorothy read this from the New American Standard Bible. Now let's read it, New International Version. Evans.
Or Lord, it doesn't not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful.
Okay, good. It does not, love does not insist on its own way. Okay, so now we could ask the question, God, and I put here love, does not insist on his own way. Now, to a lot of people, that might seem kind of surprising. Doesn't he insist on us doing things his way?
That's what we've been led to believe.
Yeah, we're led to believe that the Bible teaches exactly that God insists on obedience, insists
he's
on
like
doing things
us,
his
yeah.
way. Yeah, like us. So are there examples in the scripture of God not insisting on his own way? Well, it turns out there's quite a few. And there's a principle I refer to as divine accommodation. Accommodation where God does not insist on getting his own way, but even gives in, we could say, to the wants and desires of others. And this is a good verse for that. Not talking of a specific example, but in general, God does this. Psalm 145:16.
You open your hand and satisfy the desire of every living thing.
Okay. Notice not just the need, but the desire. Okay.
Yeah.
And I put here a definition of accommodation, the act of accommodating, adjustment of differences, anything that supplies a need, want, favor, convenience, etc. Okay. So let's look at some divine accommodation examples. And we're looking for examples. This is mainly Old Testament, where God gave Israel what they wanted, even though it was not what he wanted. Okay. He did not insist on his own way, but he gave them what he wanted. And I would say that is evidence of God's humility. And the first example, and it's a very good one, is granting Israel a king. So let's read 1 Samuel 8:4-6. Michael.
Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord.
Yeah, the thing displeased Samuel. So that indicates he saw there was a problem. Okay. Yikes, they're asking for a king, and God is their king. So he went to God to say what was going on. And we read that in verses 7 to 9. Paul.
And the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them, according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods. So they are doing to you also. Now therefore heed their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them, and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them.
Okay, so God said to grant them their request. We call that an accommodation, even though it was not the best for them. And he told Samuel to explain to them why it was not a good idea. And Samuel did that, and we see that in verses 10 to 17. Dorothy, 1 Samuel 8, 10 to 17, please.
And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. And he said, this will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots and for his horsemen. And some shall run before his chariots. And he will appoint him captains over thousands and captains over fifties, and will set them to ear his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war, and instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be confessionaries, and to be cooks, and be bakers. And he will take your fields and your vineyards, and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the tenth of your seed, and of your vineyards, and give them to his officers and to his servants. And he will take your men servants and your maid servants and your goodliest young men and your asses, and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants.
Okay, does that sound like a good deal
For the
No
king,
way.
for the king, yes.
for the king? I don't know why the people would accept that, except they were set on having a king. They wanted to be like all the other nations. Crazy. Be careful what you ask for. Yeah, exactly. So God had Samuel tell them that they would have to bear the consequences of their decision. And we just read all those consequences listed out as to what would happen. So let's read verse 18. Evans, 1 Samuel 8, 18.
And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye shall have chosen you.
And the Lord will not hear you in that day. So even after having the dangers of a monarchy explained to them, they still insisted on having a king, which was granted. Okay, verses 19 to 22.
Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, but we will have a king over us, that we may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he repeated them in the hearing of the Lord. So the Lord said to Samuel, heed their voice and make them a king. And Samuel said to the men of Israel, every man go to his city.
This verse from 1 Chronicles 29:32 is very interesting. This verse shows that it is the Lord who should have been reigning over them.
Okay, then Solomon sat on the throne of the Lord as king instead of David, his father, and prospered, and all Israel obeyed him.
Okay, so the point is, it's the throne of the Lord. There should have been God on that throne. Okay.
Yeah,
So it could say, instead of the God of Israel. Notice, because either David or Solomon were both there in his place, right? Notice also that the people did not entirely reject God. They just rejected God's role of reigning over them and directing their affairs via the prophets, such as Samuel, as he had done previously. They wanted a king instead. So is that a clear example of accommodation, of God giving in to the desires of people,
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
of God's humility? And it's, in a way, it's the best example because not only did he give them what they wanted, but he stepped down and allowed them to put someone else in his place. That's essentially what happened. Okay, and he went further than that even. Since there was no established monarchy and line of succession from an established monarchy, who would be king? God knew the sort of king they desired. He made the decision and chose a man that would please them, okay, not himself. So on the day the king was presented, they were reminded again that it was not a good idea. 1 Samuel 10:19.
But you have today rejected your God, who himself saved you from all your adversities and your tribulations. And you have said to him, no, set a king over us. Now therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your clans.
So remember, when Saul was chosen, he was head and shoulders above the others. Okay, so he was very much appealed to them to be their leader. So let's read this, 1 Samuel 10:23-25. Dorothy.
And they ran and fetched him thence, and when he stood among the people, he was higher than any of the people, from his shoulders and upward. And Samuel said to all the people, see ye him who the Lord has chosen, and there is none like him among all the people. And all the people shouted and said, God save the king. Then Samuel told the people the manner of the kingdom, and wrote it in a book, and laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house.
Okay, so they liked Saul. They thought he'd be a great king. So the manner of the kingdom that Samuel wrote in a book was what he had told them earlier in these verses we read. After Saul's first military victory as king, Samuel presented him again, confirming that he was their choice. 1 Samuel 12:13, Evans.
Now therefore, behold the king ye have chosen, and whom ye have desired. And behold, the Lord had set a king over you.
Okay. So really, Saul was their choice, not God's. This was another accommodation on God's part. God picked Saul, but he was a man who matched the ideals of what the people wanted. If God had felt free to pick a man to be king at that point, like a man he wanted, it would have been someone like David, right? I don't have that verse in here, but he referred to David. I don't think I have it, a man after his own heart. So again, it was confirmed that what they had done was sinful in 1 Samuel 12:19-20.
And all the people said to Samuel, pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we may not die, for we have added to all our sins the evil of asking a king for ourselves. Then Samuel said to the people, do not fear, you have done all this wickedness, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart.
Okay. So while they had done wickedly, they had not totally turned from following God, and he continued to work with them despite their rejection of him. Really. That's humility, I would say. And even when Saul didn't work out, God continued allowing the monarchy, but he personally chose the second king. Okay, here we have about David, 1 Samuel 13:14. Okay.
But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee.
So God, while not approving, worked with them within the choices they had made. And we know that God did not approve of Israel having a monarchy, but he continued to accommodate them. And where did that lead? Wasn't to a good place, was it?
No.
No, not at all. So this verse shows that to begin with, God was their king. 1 Samuel 12:12.
And when you saw that Nahash, king of the Amorites, came against you, you said to me, no, but a king shall reign over us, when the Lord your God was your king.
Okay, so God was their king. And ultimately, they, or at least their future leaders, said in John 19:15, Dorothy.
Away with him, crucify him. We have no king but Caesar. Oh dear.
Yes, oh dear, that's pretty much ultimate rejection there.
Certainly would have stung, wouldn't it?
Yes, absolutely. God was hurt very much about it, I think.
Think how he must have felt when he heard that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Now we're going to look at, I've titled this Moses Turns God Down. And it's another good example of God accommodating. So remember, God met Moses at the burning bush and gave him the good news about this plan to deliver Israel from Egypt. And it was good news to Moses even. Of course, he had been there and his people were there until Moses learned that he was to be the one to lead them out. That didn't excite him very much here. Let's read Exodus 3:10, Evans.
Come now, therefore, and I will send to thee unto Balaam, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt.
Okay, so God's plan was to send Moses to Pharaoh to speak on his behalf and negotiate, or we could say even demand, Israel's release. So I'm going to expand on this little illustration here. I call this Plan A. God appoints Moses to speak. That was the original plan. How should Moses have responded to that?
Yes, God, I'll do it.
Okay. Yes, or something like Isaiah said, here am I, send me. Okay, that would have been a good response.
Mhm.
But let's see what Exodus 4:10 says about that, Judy.
Then Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue.
Okay, so Moses objected with an excuse. Why did he do that?
Maybe he truly felt that
No
he
trust.
Didn't trust?
didn't trust. Yeah.
And Judy, you said,
Maybe he truly felt he couldn't do it. He just felt inadequate.
Yes, he did.
Might have been fearful of going back to Egypt too.
yeah, I mean, he had fled there, one
Right.
thing, yeah. So it was either a legitimate concern or he just wanted out or some mixture. We don't know exactly. Okay. But anyway, he objected. So we've got God appoints Moses to speak. That was plan A. And this line down here is showing Moses' objection. I'm not eloquent and am slow of speech. So Moses was making excuses, basically saying, no thanks. And how did God reply? Did he strike Moses dead? No. Basically, God accommodated Moses' concern and proposed a plan B, a workaround for the problem, for Moses' concern. 4:11-12, Michael.
And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb, or deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say.
Okay. So expanding on this diagram, we've got Moses' objection and God proposes a solution. Okay, I will teach thee what to say. So we could call that plan B. So God was saying, okay, I will accommodate your concerns.
Yep.
That should have taken care of Moses' concern. I mean, what better teacher could one have, of what to say or how to speak? But how did Moses respond to that? Exodus 4:13.
But he said, oh my Lord, please send by the hand of whomever else you may send.
Not me.
We've got plan B, and now we've got Moses objecting again. Please send someone else. And here's some other versions for verse 13. Let's read them off the screen because there are different versions here. English Standard Version. Dorothy?
But he said, "Oh, my Lord, please send someone else."
Okay, and then the next one, Evans, if you can read that, but Moses.
But Moses again pleaded, Lord, please, I send anyone else.
Okay, so you can almost hear Moses in desperation, essentially, no thanks, send someone else. I don't want to do it. So what was God's response?
I think Moses was hearing for nothing, but he was a stammerer, maybe. That's why he was saying that, may you send someone else? Because I'm not speaking well.
Yes.
And he said, Is not Aaron the Levite your brother? I know that he can speak well. And look, he is also coming out to meet you. When he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. Now you shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. And I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and I will teach you what you shall do. So he shall be your spokesman to the people, and he himself shall be as a mouth for you, and you shall be to him as God.
Okay, does that sound conciliatory? We could use that word on God's part. Is God giving in just partly to what Moses wants?
Yep.
Isn't he trying to make it easy on Moses?
Yep.
So now let's read verse 14 again, noticing the first part that I left out above here. So Exodus 4:14, Michael.
And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And he said, Is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? I know that he can speak well. And also, behold, he cometh forth to meet thee. And when he seeth thee, he will be glad in his heart.
Okay, so does the anger of the Lord was kindled, having those words in there, seem like a contradiction?
Well, it depends what you mean by anger, I suppose.
Yeah. So it depends on how you define anger or wrath. And I put the link in here because we've talked about that before, but it's there if anyone wants to go see. So now we have God humbly giving in to Moses and agreeing to send Aaron, and we could call that plan C. Okay, so God appoints Moses to speak. Moses says, no thanks, I can't talk well. Moses said, I'll teach you what to say. Moses objects again, send someone else. And then God, in anger or wrath, says, okay, I'll send Aaron. And we can call that plan C. And finally, in verse 18, it says, and Moses went. So no more objections. He finally went. And the later history, when you look at the golden calf incident, showed that Aaron, in that position of spokesman for Moses, caused problems for Israel, with the golden calf especially. So it was not the best arrangement, certainly not God's original plan, his plan A, yet he made another accommodation to meet Moses' concerns. So the account of this concession leading to plan C starts with the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, followed by not a punishment for disobedience, not even a rebuke, but simply by suggesting an alternate arrangement that would be more acceptable to Moses. It could be that the anger was simply his withdrawal to not be with Moses' mouth as originally proposed, and to instead appoint an intermediary spokesman. There was certainly no indication that the anger was what we would commonly understand to be anger. There were no words of reprimand, no angry actions were mentioned. In fact, consider what was said. The angry Lord mentioned Moses' brother. He complimented Aaron's speech. He said Aaron was coming to meet Moses. He said Aaron would be glad to see Moses. And he said that Moses would be to his brother as God. Is there any angry words in there? No. It's even hard to imagine those would be spoken in an angry tone of voice. And surely Moses would have been glad to see his brother after 40 years. Because he had been away from Egypt that long. So God's anger, wrath, fury, etc. is consistently used in Scripture in association with his withdrawing from people or from certain aspects of their life or situations. There are certainly times when he abandons them to a much greater degree than simply not using them as a spokesman to a Pharaoh. If they are abandoned or given up to their enemies, to themselves, or to destructive forces of nature, much worse consequences can come. So Moses was not giving up on or rejecting God. He simply did not want to be God's spokesman. No doubt he lost a blessing through his reluctance, but God accommodated his wishes. And this whole story, we can see it follows a pattern of, and notice the color coding here. First of all, man sinning, then God in wrath or anger accommodates the sinner, and finally trouble comes. And that's referred to and explained more on this page. And I've actually found 70 examples of that pattern in scripture, and I'm sure there's more. So we can lay it out here. Moses' sin of distrust caused the Lord's anger or wrath, which was manifested in him accommodating at Moses' own request, in the sense that he would then not use Moses directly as a spokesman to Pharaoh, as he had proposed, and instead he appointed Aaron in Moses' place in that role. And we know the trouble that resulted later from Aaron holding that position of authority, which was the golden calf incident. So even though it was not what was originally proposed by God, not his plan A, God accommodated Moses' concerns and went with plan B and even plan C. So I've put here, just to show the pattern a bit more, this word SWAT here. So the S is man sins, and typically I'll use green for that because the first sin was in the green garden. And then the W is God in wrath or anger, because the color red is used for, red hot anger. And W, we can actually put the word weeping in there. That comes into it. And we'll see some verses. And then the A is accommodates. God accommodates or yields to man's desires. We could say God leaves back to the blue sky. Okay, that's why I use blue. Might just be leaving in the sense of leaving man to his own results of his own choices. And the T is the trouble that comes from another source, not from God. Okay, and orange is the color for warning. So the weeping even comes into this here. Let's look at Isaiah 63:9. Paul.
In all their affliction he was afflicted, and the angel of his presence saved them. In his love and in his pity he redeemed them, and he bore them and carried them all the days of old.
Okay, so God himself was afflicted, this is saying. Okay, let's go to Mark 3:5. Dorothy.
And when he had looked round about on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he saith unto the man, Stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored whole as the other.
Okay, with anger being grieved. So in a sense, the being grieved is defining or describing the anger.
Yeah.
Luke 19:41. Evans.
And when he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it.
Okay, thank you. So the main points of the story as far as God's humility goes is basically God said to Moses, go give this message to Pharaoh. Moses said no. And God said, okay, have it your way. I've put a little diagram here to kind of show how this works. This little man here is within this blue hedge of God's law. It's God's law of protection. And often what happens is man breaks out of the hedge. He desires to go after sin. Okay, so he steps outside of God's law. And the question when he does that is, does God honor free will? And we've got two choices, either yes or no. If God did not honor free will, then God would basically be putting man all the time back into this enclosure. I've even put, a piece of plywood and a hammer and nails here covering it up. He won't let man out to do what he wants to do. And the result, if God dealt with our choices that way, would be that man is protected and controlled. Protected, but controlled and with no free will. Not allowed to step outside of that. If God honors free will, which I believe he does, then God leaves the breach open. If we break open the wall because we want to step outside of God's law, he lets us do that. But the result will be that we experience the consequences. We're free, but we reap the natural results of that choice to step outside of God's law. And here's just kind of another version of the same thing, shown in a different way. God's law is meant as a hedge of protection. Wanting what is out there, we sin, causing breaches in the hedge. Okay, so it's breaking this open. That gives Satan access to tempt and harass us. And some people will rebel, rejecting God's law entirely and step outside of his protection. And then they are entirely unshielded from Satan's attacks. Okay, but thank God we can turn to him in trust, and he will restore that hedge again and protect us. Okay. Yeah, you don't want to end up in this situation. Okay, stay within God's law and you'll be safe. Okay, now we're going to look at another principle, another example of accommodation. That is where God gave them quail. Okay, here's a nice picture of a quail. It's not like the quail we have around here, of which we have many. But this is a quail, the European quail. And I've got an article here and I've got the link. You can go and read the whole thing. I'm just going to read a couple of highlights. This is from sciencenordic.com, and this is a very new article, actually. In the Old Testament, the book of Numbers recounts that many Israelites died after the consumption of this poisonous bird during their exodus from Egypt. The first sentence just identifies the exact species and talks about their tissue or the presence of poison in their flesh. Interestingly, quails are poisonous only during migration, and more specifically, while they are flying certain routes. Okay? Now, the rest of this doesn't correspond exactly, but it's pretty close, and it suggests the possibility that what could have happened was these quail were migrating because they, murmured and complained and wanted this flesh food. God accommodated that desire and basically withheld his protection, as when he withheld his protection about the serpents in the wilderness. The winds blew these poisonous quail in and people died. Okay, now here's an interesting verse, Ezekiel 20:23-25.
Also, I lifted my hand in an oath to those in the wilderness that I would scatter them among the Gentiles and disperse them through the countries, because they had not executed my judgments, but had despised my statutes, profaned my Sabbaths, and their eyes were fixed on their fathers' idols. Therefore, I also gave them up to statutes that were not good and judgments by which they could not live.
The King James just says, wherefore I gave them also statutes. Judy read the New King James, I gave them up to statutes. Okay, either way, he allowed them to have their free will. This word gave is the Hebrew word nathan. And actually, this is a good example of the fact that many Hebrew words can be translated in a great variety of ways. This original word nathan is translated 116 different ways in the King James Bible. That's quite a few choices for the translators. And it's often done in a permissive sense. Like, not that he gave them because he wanted to, but he gave them in the sense he allowed them to have something. Okay. Okay, let's look at this. This is another accommodation. God allowing the Israelites to go the route of warfare. Okay, not his original plan again. So when the Israelites left Egypt, they did not have weapons of war, nor were they trained or in any way prepared for conflict. It was not God's intent that they should even see war. Okay, and I don't have it in here, but remember he said that he would drive the Canaanites out. That he would take care of that for them. So Exodus 13:17, Michael.
And it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God let them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. But God said, lest perhaps the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt.
Okay, any comments?
We certainly didn't want them to even see war, experience it at all.
Yeah, he didn't want them to fight at all.
No.
There was lots of them, like it could be a big army, but had women and children, flocks and herds, had no military training, no weapons when they left Egypt. However, it seems that the Israelites, seeing the dead Egyptian soldiers on the seashore after the Red Sea incident, acquired their weapons. Exodus 14:30, Paul.
So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore.
Okay. So in taking those weapons, Israel made a decision that they would use arms in their own defense rather than waiting on God who had promised to defend them.
That is an assumption, isn't it, Ray?
I was just going to say that. It's an
Verse 30
assumption.
doesn't specifically state that. It's just something that we can see no other way around them acquiring weapons.
Oh.
Certainly God wasn't going to give it to them.
And as slaves in Egypt, they wouldn't have been allowed to have weapons, I wouldn't think.
Yeah. It's an assumption, but it's an assumption based on it's just reasonable. I mean, they wouldn't have been given weapons. It doesn't say they were given weapons when they left Egypt.
It's a good assumption.
Yeah, a good assumption.
And they
Okay.
didn't have the means to make weapons.
And when they first used the weapons against the Amalekites, who were, remember, they came from behind and were killing the stragglers, basically. That was early on. That was before Sinai. And they already had those weapons. They must have, because they fought a war against an armed enemy. Okay. And God's actions in the Old Testament must be consistent with what Jesus taught. I and my Father are one, he said. And here's something Jesus said about weapons, about a sword. Matthew 26:52.
Put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword.
Okay. So can you see that this is another example, Israelites choosing warfare and how God dealt with it? Another example of accommodation on God's part, which reflects his humility, right? Now we'll look at another one here, allowing divorce. So let's read about God's original plan for marriage, Genesis 2:24, Dorothy.
Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh.
Okay. So the New Testament actually gives a reason for God later allowing divorce. Matthew 19:5-8. Evans.
And I said, for this because shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God had joined together, let no man put asunder. They say unto him, why did Moses then commanded to give a writing of divorce and to put her away? He said unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so.
Okay, so Deuteronomy, book of Deuteronomy includes this allowance in the statutes and judgments related by Moses, the allowance to do this here. Deuteronomy 24 and verse 1.
When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanness in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house.
So where it says gave statutes that were not good, would this be an example of one allowing
Yeah.
divorce?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
think so.
But it was God accommodating their situation, basically. And before this was given, Moses saying, let him write her a bill of divorce. That was kind of like an honorable discharge, you can almost say. Because before that, a man who wasn't happy with his wife would just basically boot her out the door. And she had no rights, nothing. And this kind of gave more rights and more legitimacy to her position, I guess. Okay, and there's other examples. We won't go through them, but he allowed slavery. That's not within God's ideal. He allowed polygamy. Remember, many of the patriarchs, even Abraham in that era, were polygamous. He allowed capital punishment. Okay, God doesn't want to see death, but it was necessary in a sense to maintain order. I mean, he gave us governments, etc. Sacrifices. Yeah, a couple of other examples I put there. We won't go through. So let's look at this question. Is God really humble? I mean, we've seen a few examples that suggest that, but aren't there passages that sound kind of prideful on God's part? We'll look at a few. I didn't get much time on this. We could probably think of other ones, quite a few of them actually, but it needs to be understood in the right way. Let's consider this phrase, the Lion of the tribe of Judah.
And one of the elders said unto me, Weep not. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed to open the book and to loose the 7 seals thereof.
Okay. The Lion of the tribe of Judah is, how would you characterize that terminology?
Well, we know that's referring to Yeshua,
Yes.
but he doesn't sort of behave like a lion as Satan is a lion.
Okay.
He behaves more like a lamb,
Okay.
right? That's why he's referred to as the lamb.
Right. So the Lion of the tribe of Judah is almost contradictory, and you'll see pictures in Christian material of, a powerful lion representing Yeshua. It kind of makes him sound more prideful than humble almost.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've put the link here for a study we did on the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And let's take note that prevailed is usually translated as overcome. Okay, as in these verses, Revelation 12:11. Paul.
And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death.
Okay, and then Revelation 3:21, Dorothy.
To him that overcometh will I grant to sit with me in my throne, even as I also overcame and am set down with my Father in his throne.
Okay, so prevailed there in Revelation 5:5 is translated, the same original word is translated as overcame in these verses. And here's another one actually, 1 John 5:4, Evans.
Okay, for whatsoever is born of God overcometh the world, and this is the victory that overcometh the world, even our faith.
Okay, so that word is most often used as overcoming through faith. And prevailed, the way it was used in Revelation 5:5, sounds more like prevailing over someone else, like to conquer, which starts to sound rather military, like overcoming by power and might. So on careful examination, this is very interesting. The Lion of the tribe of Judah is what kind of a lion? It actually tells us in Genesis 49:9, Judah is a lion's whelp. Okay, so
Cub.
yeah, it's actually a cub. It's not a full-grown male fierce lion. Okay, and Ezekiel 19:2 is interesting. It talks about a lioness who lays down nourishing. She nourished her whelps. Okay, nourished her whelps, and she's lying down. She's nursing them. This tells me that a whelp is actually a nursing lion cub. That's in contrast to this verse, 1 Peter 5:8.
Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour.
It's interesting to lay out and look carefully at the contrast here. Jesus is the Lion of Judah, a lion cub being fed, and Satan is a roaring lion looking for someone to eat. Okay, quite a contrast there, right?
Mhm.
In Philippians 2:6, it says, Jesus thought it not robbery to be equal with God. In Isaiah 14:14, Satan said, I will be like the Most High. Okay. And Jesus humbled himself to the point of being obedient unto death in Philippians 2:8. And Satan said, or it said of Satan, thine heart was lifted up. So exactly the opposite in each case, right? Quite a contrast.
Yeah.
So this Lion of the tribe of Judah is not coming with lightning in his fists, as the song goes. Rather, our awesome God is so awesome because he can overcome while being humble, without using force, and while by putting others first, because he does respect the free will of others. You know, we're just looking at things that might suggest that God has pride, perhaps, and trying to sort those out. Let's look at this verse, Isaiah 6:1, Michael.
In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple.
Okay. And I put a few things in here. I didn't quite get a chance to get all this worked out here, but what does high and lifted up suggest?
To me, it's
Exalted.
high and lifted up, like
Mhm.
it physically high above.
Okay, which might suggest what?
Exalted.
He's exalted, he's honored,
Okay, exalted and
he's
honored.
magnified.
Right, okay, all good terms. But does he do that himself?
No.
No,
Of course not.
Okay, so how is he high and lifted up then?
as we exalt him, or people exalt him, or the
Okay,
angels exalt him.
angels exalt him. Someone mentioned physically.
Mhm.
We know I think it's in Ezekiel, it talks about cherubim lifting his throne and moving him around. Right? He doesn't lift himself up, he's lifted up and honored by others.
No.
Okay, that's the point. Okay, a few verses I did get here.
You shall have no other gods before me.
Okay. So that's basically doing away with the competition almost.
Mhm.
But there's got to be a reason he says that other than pride, if God is actually humble. Okay, let's read Isaiah 46:9.
Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is none else. I am God and there is none like me.
Okay. So why does God say things like that? And like I say, we can probably find other verses. It sounds kind of like exalting self. But what's God's motive for saying things like that?
Just don't mess with me.
Oh, okay, the way you said it, Dorothy. Don't mess with me or else.
No, not where else. Just don't mess with me. I've got the power, and he has.
Okay, that's still sounding kind of. Okay, what's another way of thinking of that?
Well, he knows that his way is the best way for the people that he created. If they follow other gods, that's not a good thing, because they demand, human sacrifices and horrible other things too, but he doesn't do that.
Right. Any suggestions of like follow me, don't go after others? It's not because God is proud or he wants the glory or anything, but it's for the good of his people.
Yeah, he wants to maintain us to have life.
Yeah.
His way is life, right? And he knows because he created us. And if we don't follow him, all the other gods, small g, because there's only one big God,
Yeah.
are idols, and they lead to death. So life and death.
Okay. So it's totally for the good of his people. And actually that verse would be good in here. I desire, however it goes, that thou might have life and have it more abundantly.
Yeah.
They can only have that abundant good life by following him.
Those
Because-
idols are demons.
Yeah, you're gonna get in big trouble following them. And he says a few things about pride, or a few things are said here, like Proverbs 8:13. Evans, Proverbs 8:13.
Okay, the fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride, and arrogancy, and the evil way, and the froward mouth do I hate.
Okay. He hates things like that, including, and maybe especially pride, is first on the list, because why?
Well, again, it leads to death.
Okay, it's going to lead to death potentially among his people.
That's sin.
Okay, Proverbs 6:16-17.
These 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination to him. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood. And then
Okay,
there's more.
and there's more on the list. That's the first verse in the list, and the first one in the list is a proud look. Okay, he does not like pride. In fact, we understand that pride in Satan's heart, it seems, was quite possibly the first sin ever. Not just among people, but ever.
Envy.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, if you're busy loving yourself, you're not loving God and others.
Right, right. Resist not evil, let him have thy cloak also. If he demands to go a mile, go with him 2 miles, that ye may be the children of your father. Okay, that you would be like your father, because your father would do such things. And this is a good verse to end with, I think.
But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as by